Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the next episode of the QP Insights. And today I've got myself a founder of Catalyst Develops Optimisation. Danny is a coach, a consultant, a trainer, facilitator, an entrepreneur, basically, from all walks of life, and a veteran to boot as well. So good morning, Danny. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Ash. Thanks for inviting me on.
My pleasure, mate. My pleasure. Really excited about this, mate. And really interested to see or understand, draw out your perspective of human performance. But before we start, mate, I always like to delve into people's backgrounds. So if you wouldn't mind giving us a bio of who you are, what you do in your words, and how you've got to where you are right now. I love it. It's really interesting to figure out people's backgrounds.
Okay, great. So what do I do now? I help organisations to minimise what mental health challenges mean to them. So helping people to respond more positively to challenges and, hopefully make them happier and more fulfilled in their roles, and that sort of thing. And, I also do a coaching role as well within that. Where have I come from, so to speak? I'm from the Wirral. Still, I live back there now. I spent 14 years in the military. So what did that look like? A little bit like what the intro to begin with. Very various roles, if you will. So by trade, I was a Royal Engineer plant operator. However, that was definitely not my strong suit. And I didn't do an awful lot of it at all in my career. Started off with 5-9 Commando Squadron, then changed into the regiment that it is now, 2-4. Did an Afghan tour with those guys, did search. So for anyone who doesn't know what that means, basically I was one of the fools that would just walk around looking for the things that would go bang and hurt people. And that was my whole job, if you will, which posed lots of interest in cognitive challenges and stresses and whatnot, which is part of my journey to where I am now. Then I spent a long time in my career as a physical training instructor. And yeah, that my final role was within a training school in the military, where I did various bits and bobs in that role. What kind of brought me to where I am, though, was about 8 years ago. A series of events happened within my life. So I had my father had a stroke, which has left him in a wheelchair since. My mother had a big mental health challenge that, it isn't fair to me for me to discuss in such a public forum without. But, essentially it was some of the biggest challenges people can have mentally with depression and whatnot. Then not long after that, a really close friend of mine died. And what resulted from that was I became very focused, I would call it, on health, my health in particular. And, it led me to essentially becoming obsessed with it, if you will, anxiousness and whatever else. So I'd have a slight pain in the chest, the chest, I should say, which happens from time to time. We have little niggles, don't we? It's very, very normal. But if I had that, I would then think, right, what is that? Why has that happened? That shouldn't happen. And I was mid-20s at the time, and for want of a better word, I was operating as a professional athlete, i.e. my job was to take physical training all day, and that was my job. So there was no logical reason for that to be an issue. But again, the cycle of it is I was thinking about it so much. So there was the times where I thought about something where there was nothing there, more than likely. Was the times where the tension from thinking about those things caused me to have some sort of challenge or some sort of pain, of course. And at the time I had to go away quite briefly after my friend died, like really soon, 5-6 weeks later. And what that resulted in was I was working under a new manager, and we didn't get on.
Yeah.
We didn't get on, which I'm sure many people, that's the situation they're in. But for me, it went further, that we clashed so much that it just took over my life, because I was away. For anyone who's gone away in the military, you're with these people all day, every day. There's nothing you can do about it. And because I was managing, the anxiousness on one side, and then I was managing the stress related to the other side, it kind of converged, whereby I got a headache.
Mm-hmm.
I hope that I've got a dog on my lap, by the way. So it converged with me getting a headache that was 4 months long. It was a tension headache. The doctor kept telling me I had a tension headache, but I was convinced that I had a brain tumor. Absolutely convinced.
Yeah.
And anyway, without going into the ins and outs of it, I would never say that I was suicidal. But it took over my life to the point where the place where I was, the location was great.
Yeah.
It was Sunshine Tour, as we soldiers would call it. But I didn't want to leave my room. I didn't want to do anything really. My main role at the time was an adventure training type role, and my actual job was operating a powerboat.
Yeah.
So that was my job, and I hated it, and I hated every single second of it. And I reflect back now and feel terrible about hating it. I don't feel terrible, but it makes me sad more than anything that something that should have been the crown jewel of an army career was the worst experience I had. And really, that's probably what's led me to where I am now. When I was leaving the army, I did a mental health first aid course. One of the lads just said to me, "Oh, you'll find that interesting. You should go on it." And it was one of the first times where I actually had a realization that I'd had like an actual mental health issue. I was sitting there and I was thinking, yeah, that sign and symptom, I had that. And even though I'd had a form of treatment through the military, it had never registered that I'd had a mental health issue. There was never like a dialogue of like, okay, you have this or you have that. It was all very just trying to manage, the symptoms and the issue. So that was pretty much, what took me to that. Because, if I'm honest, it was just such a dark time for me, and where it should have been so good. I don't want anybody else to feel that way. And I think that it's very important for leaders and managers to have this kind of understanding of these issues. Because if somebody would have had a bit of understanding and empathy well, not necessarily empathy because they didn't know what was going on, but someone would have had a bit more knowledge, then actually the whole thing could have been potentially made slightly easier. But I'm well aware of my impact in that as well, which I'm sure we'll come on to as this call goes on.
Yeah, no, it's interesting, mate. I really appreciate you sharing. It's quite a very personal story, and it's the first time I've heard that much in depth. And we've been talking for a couple of years now, so I appreciate that, mate. It's really good to understand as well your journey as well, from my perspective as well, knowing you as well as I do now. So obviously that is clearly a catalyst into sort of you transitioning. How did you find that transition and the journey of setting up, Catalyst Do?
I think, the first part of the journey is, let's look at the name I chose. Why did I choose such a long name? I think I'm going to have to go on Company's House and abbreviate it a bit. The journey, it is a journey. It's a voyage for anyone who leaves the army. I just had a really interesting call with someone, and the big factors for this journey and making it simpler for yourself is being able to be resourceful and work with what you have when you have it. For me, I'd say the first 6 months, I refer to my first 6 months post-military as the wilderness, whereby I had a rough idea, or I had an idea of what I wanted to achieve, but I had absolutely no idea of how to actually make it happen.
Yeah.
So for me, it was, fumbling around in the dark looking for a light switch. It took a good while to actually sort of understand what it was to own a business, because actually, my only understanding of people owning businesses before then was from my physical training background, being able to see how a personal trainer would operate in a commercial gym. That's really the extent of which my understanding was. So yeah, it was an interesting, and I'd say definitely a voyage. Still on the voyage now. I mean, things were absolutely going fantastic, and they still are, by the way. But Corona, I mean, that's a ubiquitous challenge for everyone. So I'm not going to harp on about my challenge.
Yeah.
But it is a voyage, and that's what it's all about.
It's an interesting one. We'll come back to the COVID thing again with the relationship to mental health. I think that there's clearly going to be more of a repercussion potentially from my perspective anyway, and I'd be interested to see what yours is on that. But before we go into that, I'd like to get my guests to define what their perspective is of human performance, what it means to you.
I think, to be quite honest with you, I've kind of already said it, but I will say it officially. For me, the big thing for me of how for human performance, it's all about how we respond to a challenge that we are faced with. So what that could look like is, have you had some sort of major trauma? Or it could be all the way down to, you've spilt some coffee on your shirt. How do you manage that challenge? Because fundamentally, if you aren't if you aren't able to manage a wider spectrum of challenges, you may be really good in some circumstances, but your performance will lack in others. And I know from personal experience, that's something that I really, as a young man, I was good at dealing with, go and do your commando course, carry loads of weight, stay awake on sentry, and all those other bits that go along with that type of thing. I was fine at that. It was all good. But I would get so annoyed with how things happened, because I'm a very curious person, and that's what makes me naturally probably gravitate towards coaching and facilitation and whatnot, because I like to, it's all about understanding. And, as I'm sure you'll know yourself, sometimes in the military, the answer to your question is because that's the way we do it. Now, that is a very infuriating answer to me, because that does not actually answer the question at all. And I think as a younger person, I would allow that to really consume me. So I could deal with all the big things, like looking for IEDs, going in, like being in contacts and all those other bits and bobs that's like the big highlight reel for people. But if somebody would annoy me in the office when we weren't on exercise or something, and that would cause me a drama. So how, there's no comparison. And, that's something that's big on, like, why I'm so big on reflection. And I probably reflect a lot more than others, because I don't think I was good at that per se as a young man. And I think the other part of it, as I've mentioned, is being happy and fulfilled within your role, because actually, as a performer, it's all well and good to be a top performer in whatever it is that you're doing. But if you're not happy and fulfilled with it, A, you could perform better, likely, because, but B, what's the point? There's no point in being a top performer if it doesn't make you happy and fulfilled. So, they're the two fundamental things for me that I would say are a linchpin for performance.
Cool. I like it, mate. Draw on one of your points, if you wouldn't mind. You said you saw it in the military context. We do things because that's the way it is. How have you found that in your move in sort of into Civvy Street in the commercial sector, specifically around the mental health? As it, quite rightly, it is now at the forefront, or is becoming to the forefront of organisations and people's minds. I don't want to say it's a buzzword, because that, but it is a buzzword at the moment. Unfortunately, we need to steer it into the right way of being a buzzword, rather than just a fad. But how have you seen that in the commercial sector?
Well, I mean, I think first things first, addressing what you've said, you're quite right. It is a buzzword. We like anybody who's on social media, you probably can't go a day without seeing, I'm raising mental health awareness.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't want to sound too pessimistic in this regard, because that goes against what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like we're in a position now where this awareness has been achieved. People know about it and understand it. So what we need to start doing now is having more quality conversations about how we're going to improve it.
Mm-hmm.
It's there's a line in one of my favorite books, Legacy. Action without vision is a nightmare, and vision without action is a dream.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I think awareness is at the moment. It's all vision and no action.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, I'm very keen on, whenever I do videos and talks and whatever else, it's all about the so what, as we would call it in the military, the so what. So, I think you're quite right. It is a buzzword, and we need less, not need, but at the moment, people throw out platitudes
Mm-hmm.
that are like, as I would call it, like bait. And I feel bad saying that, but the phrase, it's okay not to be okay. It to me, I think it's not meaningless, but it doesn't, it addresses a problem at like level one, if that makes sense. So it might help one person go, do you know what? I'm okay not to be, say it's okay not to be okay.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is if you flip it onto, like, I do a lot of this with leaders where they'll say, yeah, it's okay not to be okay. Yeah, I'm all on board with that.
Mm-hmm.
But then when I say, okay, do you talk about your mental health and the challenges that you have?
Yeah.
And then they go, ooh, everything stiffens up, becomes a lot more, well, I don't feel like it's my place to say that. And I don't want to burden my team and da-da-da-da. And I'm like, okay, so what you're saying is you're okay not to be okay,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm not.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that's the fundamental for me is, the way to change the conversation is for us to be talking, I'm okay not to be okay. Yeah. Because if not, all you're doing is, it's a lot about you guys out there. You can be come to me. I'm fine with that. I'll help you. Mm-hmm. But there isn't enough there isn't enough people believe in it.
Well, yeah, I think it's a really good point, mate. And I think it potentially comes down to you can say whatever you want, but people believe your actions more, consciously and subconsciously.
I'm always very open about my experiences with mental health. It's always, to me, it's just part of a conversation that I have frequently. Mm. And the amount of people that either when I'm delivering something or will come to me afterwards and have a word and tell me something, disclose something, and then immediately follow it up with, I've never said that to anybody, is phenomenal. And am I trying to say that I'm Jesus and people? No, of course not. But it's just that the big thing is vulnerability is strength. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, the society we've grown up in is strength is strength. Yeah. But being able to, if we were to use a military context, if somebody discloses, what they're actually doing is they're the one who steps up and goes over, out of the trench, over into the firing line first. Yeah. And it's the same way here. So you're up, you're, leading from the front on it. Mm-hmm. And at the moment, people see it as, there is still that negative, is it weakness and whatever else. And it's quite funny because I have this dialogue quite a lot, whereby I'll be talking to leaders about, I need to be strong. So I say, right, if you need to be strong, does that mean that you're inherently weak by, by having these issues and talking about these issues? And then they say, yeah. And I'll say, and then I flip it again and say, well, do you think that I'm weak? And then again, they'll be like, no, no, of course not. And it's like, well, okay, but which one are you trying to say then? Because I've just told you all of my stuff. And, if you're associating, like, which camp are you in? And that's the problem is, as I say, that with this awareness world we live in, there's too many platitudes that get spun. And as I call it, it's wallpaper. It's just there. It doesn't mean it doesn't do an awful lot, in my opinion. I think it's all about action. And yeah, that's my opinion.
So how do you think we can take this forward and sort of improve the action that we're taking around both peak performance and mental health? Because, it's an interesting relationship between the two. I'm not saying without one there's not the other, or with one there is the other, but I think in far more peak performance environments there's the potential for more mental health. I don't want to say problems, but concerns,
issues, challenges. It's
challenges. That's the right word.
I think I do think they have somewhat of a symbiotic relationship, in all honesty, because if I was to refer back to that time where I was at my worst, because that a really important point to make is I still struggle with this health related anxiety. If I'm stressed, I will be on my Apple Watch looking at my pulse, thinking, oh, is that too is that too much? Or I'll start getting random aches and pains that it's not just like oh, my arm's sore. It's like, oh, my arms are tingling. Why are my arms tingling? So, it's a challenge that I manage concurrently. So I think they do have such a, because you're always managing that challenge. So they're so closely linked. I think in terms of what could we do? I think first of all is what I would use one word, and it's empathy. I think, that from the reading that I've done, like I'm not a neuroscientist by any means, but from the reading I've done, we have a bias towards the world being a just world, or there's evidence to suggest this, by the way. So what we also have is a bias that we are good people or we are, good operators, if you will, in the world. So what happens is if we connect those two biases together, if there's somebody of a similar background to us, and they've got some sort of a problem, first things first, the just world part comes out of, well, likely done something wrong for this as a result to happen. But then the other reason why we struggle to connect with it is because we like to see ourselves in a good light. We don't like to be able to believe, our brains don't want us to be able to believe that could happen to us. And developing that understanding of empathy that, it doesn't matter why the person's in a position, like, for example, another dialogue that I have quite frequently is, for argument's sake, talking with a bunch of leaders and managers, and they'll say, oh, well, such and such a person is struggling with anxiety, but they've got no reason to. Whereas Susan, I'll just use a random word, in such a department, her husband died last year, or, she's got cancer, or so-and-so, whatever thing. And I think what people need to remember is that whatever the person is experiencing is real. And something that was once the hardest thing we've ever done, you now find easy. So think of like how much power cognitively it took way back when. And, if someone's got children, they can probably appreciate this better, to learn to tie a shoelace.
Yeah.
You know, that could be a huge challenge for somebody as a child. But now it's unconscious competence. And, you know, there's a very big parallel between the two of these things, where we're formed by our experiences, and somebody might be suffering with a stress-related issue and whatnot. But again, this ties in with the how you manage your challenges part. But, you know, somebody who has a stress-related issue, but people don't see a reason for it. They lack, you know, people just go, they're just being weak. But actually, it's just what that person needs is the ability to manage challenges better. It's understanding that just because my background was running around in the fields, getting wet, crawling through mud, whatever it might be, doesn't mean that somebody else's was. So it's not fair for me to expect somebody else without that background to have that same ability to manage that.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I can. It's easy for me to relate to it, so I get exactly where you're coming from. But yes, it's really well explained. And I think also there's something in there as well of people feeling that they're able to talk about those problems, because you know, perhaps people you flip it from the other way, so the person that has the problem may feel, oh well, my father hasn't died, I haven't got cancer, why am I feeling this way? And there's that sort of I can't get the language
Stigma.
around it, but you feel guilty for feeling that way, perhaps.
Yeah, it's stigma. So where, and this is the thing that I talk about a lot, is the stigma around mental health is, I would say, in terms of other people having it, is massively decreasing. But the self-stigma that I'm okay not to be okay is still well and truly alive and kicking. And that's where it is. And, you know, I think tying in with a couple of things that you mentioned there, it's about like the way leaders often, we've all likely heard the phrase, my door is always open. But if your door's always open, now I want to caveat this. If somebody has not had a mental health issue or nothing to talk about it, then you don't have to just waffle about it as such, the subject. But if you have experience of it and you can share that, what you've done is, rather than just giving someone permission to talk and say, you know, I'm more than happy for you to come, you've given them that permission to be vulnerable because you've done it first. You know, it's such an important point to make. And you know, again, I did a video a couple of weeks ago about actually engaging with it. So, for example, what a lot of people make I won't say mistake, but they have the assumption that if you want to talk to somebody about a mental health issue, that you have to be able to solve it and that you have to know what it is. So people like to try and say, oh, he's got bipolar, she's got or that. And actually, 99 times out of 100, they'll be, or probably 100 times out of 100, they probably won't be correct at all, because that's for professionals to go. You know, if somebody was struggling with like feeling a bit tight in the chest, you're not going to go, got hypertension. It just wouldn't happen. You know, so I think people avoid the conversation because they don't feel like they know enough about that. But actually, to me, what you need to think about is, if somebody's struggling, genuinely, the hardest thing for somebody to do is to probably reach out. A, because of what we just discussed. And B, you know, it's probably just that half the time they don't even understand it. It's such an unknown world. So the way I would describe it to people, for if you are thinking about that, that there's something different. That's all. It doesn't have to be, oh, you've got a mental health issue, let's put my arm around you. You know, there's something different and you feel like a conversation needs to be had. Then think about it like this. When we say reach out, why don't people reach out? If someone's drowning and you wouldn't say to them, hey mate, swim over to the side and then I'll stop you from drowning there. If you're strong enough, you would jump in, swim, help them to the side,
Yeah.
and then the act of stopping drowning begins there, doesn't it? And I think that reach out culture, actually we need to reach in a bit more.
Really good analogy, really powerful analogy. I like that.
Because you don't need to be able to fix anything. You just, as opposed to having a disclosure conversation, which has a lot of tension involved, of like, oh, I need to tell you something up. Actually, if it's just two humans talking and having a dialogue, much easier for the individual to disclose than if you're like, tell me what's the matter, what's going on. If you're just having a dialogue, I don't know, you say, can we meet up for a coffee? Let's catch up. Whatever it may be. That's when the success rate of people talking about their feelings is going to massively increase.
Yeah, of course. It's humans treating other humans like human beings rather than numbers or statistics or mechanisms or routines. And it's unfortunate, the industrial age and people having this mechanistic view of the life of life, and the workplace. We're organisms, we're complex, and therefore the workplace is complex as well. I like what one of the statements that you said about 20 minutes ago. I wrote it down, that vulnerability is a strength. And I think that is a really big key thing to push and drive home to everyone, really. That but especially what you're saying from the leaders to demonstrate your own vulnerability, to create an environment where others feel comfortable to have that conversation with you. That is a massive strength.
Well, it's that, and if we think slightly less on the mental health topic, it's a bit like, what would you achieve if you knew you couldn't fail? I love that quote, because what it says to me is, actually, how many things do you not try because you're afraid of what the repercussions might be? But actually, if and that's what you're doing by creating that vulnerability, is showing people that it's okay to not be perfect. It's okay not to be okay even, but you're walking, you're walking the talk, aren't you? Like, for example, that video I did last week about, I had a rubbish day last week. A few bits and bobs happened in the business, and I was just so deflated, and I had no energy whatsoever. But actually, it's fine. We are not these. It's not, the world isn't black and white, pass or fail, victory, or it's so much more than that. It's all about those, ironically, I'm wearing this, it's about the shades of grey. And it's absolutely, this mindset culture that we're in now, in my opinion, it can be very damaging for people, because if somebody doesn't have the self-awareness that they can understand about extrinsic and intrinsic motivation, and how you might look at someone and value what they have, but not necessarily the way they've achieved it, and just think, okay, well, that's their blueprint for success. I must do the same. For example, I think Jocko Willink articulates this really well, because he never says you have to get up at 4 a.m. It's, I get up at 4 a.m. and that's what works for me. And that's what I think some of the influencer world could do with being a bit more responsible about, is this works for me, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to work for you, because there's too many people out there who are motivated by, it's called your ought self. I ought to do this, I ought to do that. So they're doing things not because they want to, because they feel like they have to. But then before long, they've been following a path, and it's either, if they're not getting the success that they want or feel that they should get from it, again, it's only going to make them feel worse. But actually, they're trying to develop themselves. It's a real paradox for me.
No, it is, mate. It's absolutely right. And I think social responsibility, is one, especially for all the so-called influencers and motivators that are out there in the world.
We're all influencers, aren't we, Ash? We're all influencers.
Absolutely. Everyone's an influencer. Right.
In any way, shape, or form, you'll influence your children, your dogs, albeit that might be a bit of a challenge. Hence why I'm holding a French bulldog on my knee. But we all try and influence in some way, and it's just some of those us do it as a bit more of a job than others. That's all it is.
We do, and you influenced me recently, literally this last week. I know we discussed, we chatted the day after you said that, or the day that you set that video, and we discussed, why you'd had a bad day. And then I think it was this week, I've been doing my, my constant never-ending improvement post. And one of them, literally, I had such a shit day that literally having a shower and breathing was my highlight. Was the win. And I was having a conversation with a friend who'd read it the next day, and he was like, he's like, wow, if that was the highlight of your day, it must have really been a bad day. And I was like, yeah, it really was, but I learned from it, and as long as I learn from it and just I can brush it off and go, so what? I still had a really good shower and a nice breathing session.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
As well, though, you've done that yourself now. Is like, it's that sort of ripple effect, isn't it? Of being able to sort of, you can be authentic with yourself and say, do you know what? I had a rubbish day. And then that person who's seen that might, think, do you know what? It's fine.
The only thing I'm doing those posts is to show that, hey, yeah, I genuinely believe in, the marginal gains. You improve yourself 0.001%. If you can, if you want to, for a start, and if you can, and you go in the right direction, then fantastic. It does make a difference. But also, like, it's okay to have a shit day and everything go totally bad for you. Try and learn from it if you can, or just forget about it, dump that day, and carry on. That's life. There's plenty more days in the bag.
That's it. It's, I think what to pick up on what you said there, it's just dump that day. Mm-hmm. It's okay. Well, I didn't have a great, because here's an interesting thing that I think about, when people talk about marginal gains, those that are like really like, how can I put this without sounding like those who are true believers, and that's like the relentless mindset, like but always talk about the wins and not their losses. What about on a weekend? Are they still doing that 1% on a Saturday and Sunday, or are they maybe going out, relaxing their food, having a beer or two? Is that going to be their 1% gain? Mm-hmm. But again, we don't necessarily hear about that. It's just like when it's time, when it's that go-to week time of that never-ending what 1% is. And I really need to make this clear that I fully embrace and believe in all of that stuff as well. But I believe in the balanced approach that you're taking, and like that I would take is it is not just about I've secured this piece of business or I've done that. It's about being real, because again,
creates a false presence and a false reality for people that can be influenced a bit by it and think, oh, I can't fail because I'm trying to, copy or be influenced by that person and mimic what they're doing and learn from their lessons. If people aren't sharing their failures, then it sets a false precedence that people can't appreciate. By failure is the only way you learn from the feedback. And
exactly.
That's the way you get your marginal gains, by failing over and over again and learn from it.
Absolutely. Without a doubt. And, I think that's what's led me this way so far, is a lot about thinking back and thinking, like, my military career, I didn't get anywhere near as far as I should have in terms of the rank structure and whatever else, because of the way I was. My belief was, right, I'm a straight shooter, I'm going to tell it how it is. And because I was in an environment I spent a long time out of my initial environment of working in the commando brigade to then not working with those guys where we had our set views and ways of doing things. So then I got to that, if it didn't fit with that narrative, I wasn't happy with it.
Yeah.
It was strange because I was in a situation where I would get lots of responsibility. I would get given lots of praise, and like my ability to do my job was always praised. But when it came down to the grading and shading, I never quite got where I should have. And it was down to the fact that my blind spots were so big in terms of the stuff I was good and I was good at.
Yeah.
But the stuff I wasn't that bothered about, like plant operating, which was the main part of my job. I just, I did just chin it off effectively. And, now I just know so much more about playing being a role and not just being what you're good at.
Yeah,
The
no,
same,
it's really valuable. Yeah,
and I think I can trace that all the way back as well to GCSEs even. The stuff that I liked was, ironically, I liked maths because there was only one answer. So I could be right or I could be wrong.
Yeah.
At that level of maths anyway. I'm sure higher up there's different elements to it. And physical activity, physical training. So other than those, I wasn't all that bothered. And my grades reflected that because I got 2 Bs, 2 Cs, which was in science because I was okay at that. And everything else was just like the rest of the alphabet. And that was because I just focused all my energy on that. Now that I've grown up, so to speak, and especially owning a business, that's where you got to work those blind spots. You got to learn about marketing, about sales, and whatever else. Because the easy bit of the job now is doing the job, not getting to the point of doing the job, which is the hard part.
Absolutely. I can fully empathize with you on that one, 100%. Cool. Mate, it's been fantastic. We'll sort of have to wrap it up there, but I really appreciate your openness and your candidness. It is really, really powerful. And I've written some really good notes that I'm going to go away and reflect on for myself personally as well. So I really appreciate that. Mate, where can people find out more about you and what you do?
So my social pages are Catalyst Do or Catalyst_Do on Instagram. There's also a Facebook page. My website is www.catalystdo.co.uk, and I'm also on LinkedIn.
Cool.
I can provide all those links and whatnot to you.
Yeah, I'll put them in the show notes, mate. I appreciate that, so everyone can sort of get in touch with you. Mate, thank you very, very much for your time. I really appreciate it, and hopefully we can have another discussion and add more value, hopefully, to more people in the future.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's been great. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Cheers, mate.